Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let's give a round of applause. We're back in our building. We are back where we belong. It is so good to see you all. It's so good to see some new faces as well. If you're a new face, please make yourself a very familiar face. If you're a familiar face, thank you for coming out here. It's, again, just warming to be back in our own building and very beautiful. I want to thank the incredible staff of Partners Detroit and Yeshiva Beth Yehuda for putting on this beautiful lunch and learn and giving us this beautiful place. Let's give them a round of applause. And I want to thank you for giving up one of the most beautiful days in all of Michigan's year, probably. Just so beautiful outside to be here. Please give yourselves a big round of applause. Maybe the only one you get today. Okay, we are going to get started. We've got a three-part series. Now, before I start this series, a couple important caveats. Number one, there's a slight possibility we'll finish it in 2 weeks. I've tried to do this in 2 weeks, and I did not have time to cover everything I wanted to cover. That's why I did it in 3 weeks this time. If we finish it in 2 weeks, we'll do something fun the third week. Okay? Maybe we'll have like a bingo game or something. No, okay. That's number one. Number two is this is not my own material. I've been thankful to teach this material for a very long time, and of course I've added my own little information and anecdotes, etc., etc. However, this material has actually been around for a long time. It was part of the Discovery Seminars. It's a very common part of the curriculum over at Esha Torah. It's been used in the world of Jewish outreach for decades. I don't know who the originator was, to be honest with you. I don't know who the originator was, but I know it was not me, so I will not take any credit for origination over here. However, I will take credit for delivery. No, but I hope this works out well. Okay, so let's get down to what we're going to talk about, the 7 wonders of Jewish history. And more importantly, you might want to call this series, How Do We Know We're Right? Okay? How do we know we're right? We meet people from other religions all the time, right? And they are always intrigued by the Jewish people. They want to know why we think we're the chosen people. For starters, which again, we've talked about this before. Every religion thinks they're the chosen people. No religion is walking around and saying, we're third best. But hey, that's not bad, right? No one's walking around and saying that. Not the Christians, who say if you don't believe in JC as your Lord and Savior, you get eternal damnation. Not the Muslims, who say if you don't believe in Muhammad as the one and only true faithful prophet, then you don't deserve your head on your shoulders, right? So there's a lot of people out there, and that's the idea of us as the chosen nation. Everyone should be walking around saying, we're the people who got it right. Because if you're not the people who got it right, don't follow this. However, that being said, for some reason when it comes to the Jews, people are always fascinated or angry. Why do you think you're right? Who says you're right? Okay. Today we're going to learn the answer to that. And I want to just preface it. Imagine the following scenario. You get on a plane. And whenever you get on a plane, there's always that sort of tension. Who's going to be sitting next to me, right? You're always wondering. That's the first thing that's on your mind, especially if you get early, if you're an early boarder. If you're a late boarder, then it's just going to be who's going to be sitting next to me by the time I get to my seat. But you're always wondering, who's going to be sitting next to me? Is this going to be an interesting flight? Is this going to be an interesting 12 hours from Tel Aviv to New York City? Or is this going to be an experience in a little bit of a preview for Gehenna, right? I've had flights that were both. I've really had flights. I think one of my most fascinating flights ever, I sat next to a farmer, and we had like a 2-hour conversation about soil and earth and layers and crops and farming, and the guy blew me away. The guy was so knowledgeable on so many areas that I had zero knowledge. It was a fascinating flight. We had a great time together. I also remember flights that were incredibly difficult, where I remember one flight specifically, I didn't even want to be in this section of the plane, and somebody prevailed upon me. It was a long story. Someone convinced me to leave my seat and go to this other section of the plane, and anyway, I get down there and I'm sitting in a middle seat between guy on my right who hasn't showered since the prehistoric era, guy on my left who's talking to himself loudly the entire flight. I'm not kidding, it's a true story, right? And I'm sitting there like this, caught between a rock and a hard place, shall we say, right? So you're always wondering who's going to be sitting next to you on the flight. So you're sitting there, and unfortunately you've got a middle seat. And you're sitting there and the flight is filling up and no one's coming, and maybe like, oh man, maybe I get the extra seat. That would be amazing. All right, but no, as the flight is literally about to leave, that one last guy gets on. Big, tall guy, 6'4", got a ponytail, right? And he's got a huge tattoo of a cross on his arm, right? And he's got prayer beads around his neck. And to top it all off, he's carrying a well-worn copy of the New Testament. And you're like, oh my gosh, I really got to spend 12 hours with this guy. So you try to bury yourself in the Sharper Image magazine, right? Never before have you taken such an interest in a self-cleaning cat litter box, right? Especially because you don't have a cat, right? But no way, Sharper Image makes a self-cleaning cat litter box, right? And you're sitting there, you're like digging in, and the guy next to you says, hey, do you mind if we chat for a while? You're like, of course, I would love to chat with you for a while. He says, you're Jewish, right? And you're like, no, I'm a Hindu. Because you know that they don't get as many points for getting Hindus as they get for getting Jews. But he's got, you're pegged. You got a yarmulke, you got a chai necklace, you got a Star of David. You're like, yep, I'm Jewish. And he says to me, let me ask you a question. Your Bible says you're supposed to go by the majority, right? That's like, in the Bible, in your Testament it says that you're supposed to go by the majority. The majority of the world is not Jewish. The vast majority of the world is not Jewish. They're either Christian or Muslim or whatever. Why are you still following that ancient way? Didn't God tell you to follow the majority that they would know better? Ooh, good question. Or, by the way, I can tell you a totally different scenario. You're sitting next to some stuffy professor who is really high on himself because he's an atheist and he's so proud that he's figured out that there is no religion and that religion is the crutch of the masses, and he sees a yarmulke on your head and he decides that he has to engage in a mocking conversation telling you that religion is the cause of all evil in the world and the cause of all wars, right? Which, by the way, for the record, in the last century alone, 3 atheists caused more death to the world than all of the previous wars combined in history. Wow. Right? Hitler, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, Stalin. Right? I said 4, but Pol Pot was small. He's like a mini bad guy, right? Because he only killed like 3 to 6 million people. Right? You can't even put him in the same. If there's a table at the dais in hell, right? You know, like Hitler sitting up there and Stalin sitting up there and Mao Zedong is sitting up there, and then Pol Pot, he comes up like, show us your table card. You're not on this table, man. Come on, right? You're a low rent dictator, bad guy. Anyway, those were all guys who were atheists, and yet they caused more death and destruction, more millions of people killed than all the religious wars in history combined. In any case, he starts mocking you about religion. Oh, don't you know the Bible was just written by a bunch of old people, a bunch of old angry white men, right? What is the answer? How do we know the Bible wasn't written by a bunch of angry white men? Okay? And by the way, this is a question that's not necessarily only being asked to people on flights. It's a question that a lot of people within the Jewish faith are wrestling with today. Even people who are raised their entire lives Orthodox, doing mitzvos, keeping Shabbos and kosher, are often sitting there and asking themselves, how do we know we're right? How do we know this book wasn't just written by a bunch of old men? So this is what our goal in the next 3 weeks is to cover. Okay? One basic approach that is a very, very powerful idea that will show us conclusively that number 1, we are God's chosen people. And number 2, that whoever wrote this book had clear knowledge of all of history and control over it. Which, by the way, is not something that can be accomplished by a bunch of angry old white men. Okay? Now, let's understand the following. There have been thousands of religions throughout history. In the US, every year, roughly 250 new religions get admitted. Did you know that? Yeah, because if you're a religion, then you could apply for all kinds of, you can make your synagogues, and you can apply for nonprofit status, and there's all kinds of protections, religious protections for freedoms. So there have been all kinds of religions that have been created. I mean, there was a woman who was a nurse. I'm trying to remember what her name was, and one day she's like, I don't want to be a nurse anymore. I want to be the high priestess or a god or whatever it is. So she created her own religion, and I think her name was, let's go, it was Nancy. So she created Nancyism. And it's a religion today. It's on the books. They actually filed, they have certain criteria in order to become a religion. So there's obviously thousands of ridiculous, inane religions being created every day. And then there's also thousands of religions that have held a sway over a particular period of time. There are also thousands of ethnic groups throughout history. Thousands of peoples, thousands of civilizations. Now, here's the most important component that is the crux of everything we're going to discuss over the next 3 weeks. If you look at the religious texts of all the religions of the world, what you are going to find is that they are all the same. What do I mean they're all the same? Of course they're not all the same. The Quran is not the same as the New Testament. And the New Testament is not the same as the Hindu sacred text and the Buddhist sacred text, and so on and so forth. But they are all the same in the sense that every single one of them tells you all the incredible things that will happen to you if you follow the religion in Kingdom Come. All of them. They make incredibly bold promises. For example, Christianity, one of the largest religions in the world. If you believe in JC as your Lord and Savior, then you get EB. What is EB? EB is eternal bliss. Exactly, eternal bliss. And by the way, I've had conversations with Christians who are painting me these pictures of gold Rolls Royces and gold paved roads, and I mean, it seems like King Midas went through there for a little while, right? Everything's gold and big golden houses. I mean, whatever. Frankly, I just like a more comfortable bed. I don't want to be sleeping on a gold bed. But in any case, like all this like incredibly delightful things. And it tells you that if you believe in JC as your Lord and Savior, this is what you'll get. If you read the Muslim sacred texts, it tells you that if you wage war on behalf of Islam, then when you come to the next world, especially if you're killed in battle, in jihad, then when you come to the next world, you will be granted 70 very friendly people. Some people say 72. Some people say 72. I don't know where that came in. I think there's inflation. You know what I'm saying? Over time, all the recruitment centers were drying up, and they're like, oh, 70 not working anymore. 71! And then the next recruitment center is like, wait, they're getting all the people now because they have 71. We will offer 72. Now, by the way, here's the amazing thing. If you're a Muslim woman and you do well your whole life, you know what you get to be? Friendly person number 48. For some jihadist. Okay, anyway, all right. But where does that happen? That doesn't happen down here. No, no, no. That happens up there. So every religion in the book tells you what's going to happen in Kingdom Come. Why? Because nobody has ever come back from Kingdom Come to tell the truth, to tell what happens. So therefore, it's very safe and it's very easy to make all kinds of claims about what will happen in the world to come. Sure, you'll be granted mansions of gold. No problem. You'll be granted, everybody in heaven gets 5,000 Bitcoin. No problem, right? Whatever you want, because nobody will ever come back to disprove what you say. There is one sacred text that does the exact opposite of all the other sacred texts. And guess which one that is? That's ours, exactly. It does not describe what will happen in the world to come. If you look in the books of Tanakh, in the books of the written law, in the 24 books of Tanakh, you will not find a single open, clear reference to what happens as reward when you get to heaven. There are a few places in the Torah where there's slight hints. There are a few places where there's an extra yud, there's an extra letter, and the sages tell us that's a reference to what happens in the world to come. But if you read through the 24 books of the Bible, you will not find a description of what happens in Kingdom Come if you behave yourself. Instead, what you will find is wild and incredibly strange predictions of what will happen in this world. Which again is the one thing that all the other religions are staying away from. Because here's the problem. If you say this will happen in this world, you make all kinds of very explicit, not vague, like Nostradamus, right? I'm sure some of you have heard of Nostradamus, like this 16th century occultist who people still think was like a major prophet. If you read his works, he writes the most vague, ridiculous things like, a great tower will fall and the nation will be terrified. And then of course on 9/11, what happens? all the Nostradamus kookies pull this out and say, oh, look, haha, you see? Nostradamus knew in 1500 when he wrote, a great tower will fall and the people will be terrified. He was referring to 9/11. Yeah, okay. Like there haven't been other towers that have fallen throughout history and people have been terrified. Every time there's an earthquake and a building falls, a great tower falls and people are terrified. So, when we talk about the Torah's predictions, we're talking about very specific predictions. And what we're also going to see here is that these predictions do not happen to anyone else. When I say they're specific and strange, I mean that they're strange because they are not things that are happening to everybody in history. To write that a tower will fall is absurdly easy. Right? If I want to write a holy text that will not be disproved, I'll say, people will be happy and people will be sad. Okay, there you go. I'll never be proven wrong because throughout history, people will be happy and people will be sad. But no, the Torah makes these incredibly specific predictions, and the things that it predicts are things that don't happen in history, and yet they happen to us. So while every single book is writing either they're writing history backwards, which means they're saying this happened many years ago, JC did this, Muhammad did this, all in the past, way in the past. Our book writes what's going to happen in the future. In this world, not in Kingdom Come, and then we're going to see through the course of these weeks that it's all come true. Wild, crazy things. So that's the 7 wonders of Jewish history. We're going to see 7 specific streams. There's many more, by the way. But we're going to go with 7 overarching themes that have shown themselves to be true. And what we're going to see again is that number 1, we are God's chosen people. And number 2, that whoever wrote this book was not a group of angry white men or angry women. It was a God who knew what was going to happen throughout history and actually had controls over history to make strange things happen for one particular people. Okay, now, the Torah does not require us to study biology. It'd be nice to study biology. If you're learning Tractate Zavachim and Menachos and Chulin, right? If you're learning the Gemara, you may come up against all kinds of physiology, especially animal physiology. If you're learning certain mumim, certain disqualifying blemishes that a person could have, you'll learn about some human anatomy. But we're not required to learn biology. We are not required to learn math. The Talmud has certain algebraic equations. It's good to know math, but you're not required to learn math. You're not required to learn music. Music is beautiful. Music is amazing. But you're not required to learn music. The Torah does ask us to learn one discipline, and that is history. Meaning one non-necessary, obviously we were supposed to learn Torah, but I'm talking about one discipline that is not specifically Torah, and that is history. Let's see your source sheet, source number 1. This comes from Devarim, Lamed Beis, Zion, Deuteronomy 32:7. Zechor Yemos Olam, says God. Remember the days of old, Binu Shnos Dar Vadar. Understand, look into what happened in every single generation. Sha'al avicha v'yaged lecha v'yagedcha zekeinecha v'yomer lach. Ask your father and he will tell you, your elders and they will instruct you. Hashem is saying to us, I want you to understand what happened in history. Because history will be the proof of me. In the book of Deuteronomy, God says again, I want you to study history. Because history will be the proof of me. Okay, so if you want to know that we're right, look at history, you will see that we're right. We are not the only people to recognize this. Many non-Jewish philosophers and greats have recognized this as well. King Louis XVI had a famous philosopher in his court named Pascal. And one day, as King Louis XVI was rushing off to lunch, he stopped for a quick philosophical bite. He said, Pascal, my dear philosopher, please, in one sentence, prove to me that God exists, right? There's a guy who's in a hurry for lunch, right? In one sentence, prove to me that God exists. So Pascal says, the Jews, Your Majesty, the Jews. Like if you need one word to prove the reality of God, look at the Jewish people and their history. That's a non-Jewish philosopher saying that. Mark Twain, one of my favorite American literary icons. Samuel Clemens, a big Judeophile. He loved the Jewish people. He was not Jewish, but he did love the Jewish people. He actually traveled to Israel. We're going to see more later on in this series about his travels to Israel. He traveled to Israel. He wrote an article in Harper's Bazaar, which was a paper back in the day that described his feelings towards the Jews. And this is from 1899, this article. Here we go. If the statistics are right, says Mark Twain, the Jews constitute but 1% of the human race. It suggests a nebulous dim puff of stardust lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought never to be heard of. He's a tiny, minuscule people. Properly, he ought never to be heard of, but he is heard of, has always been heard of. He is as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his commercial importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. By the way, think about this. Just think of today's day and age. This was written in 1899. Just think about how incredibly, exactly relevant this is in today's day and age of 2018. His contributions to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, and abstruse learning are also way out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvelous fight in the world in all the ages, and he has done it with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptians, the Babylonian, and the Persian rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greek and the Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they are gone. Other peoples have sprung up and held their torch high for a while, but it burned out and they sit in twilight now, or have vanished. The Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? Mark Twain, a non-Jewish writer, says there is something, when you look at history, about these Jewish people. There is something unique about them. There is something different about them. What is the secret of his immortality? And what we're going to see throughout this series is that the secret of his immortality is that we have a God who wrote the Torah, who wrote our history before it happened, who made incredibly accurate and wild predictions about what would happen, and he's got control over history. That's our secret. Now, quick word from our sponsors. Incredible H2O over here. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. Alrighty, what are the 7 wonders of the Jewish history? What are those incredible things that the Torah clearly laid out for us and does not happen to other people, but has happened to us? Now, some of them we're going to see happens to perhaps a very small other number of people, but primarily very, very small numbers. Okay. Number 1, the idea of an eternal people. God promised Abraham 3,700 years ago that his descendants would always be here and that his descendants would always recognize who they were and that his descendants would always be this very unique and very identifiable people. How many peoples on this planet have been around for 3,700 years? Who?
Only the Jews?
Only the Jews? Well, I would like to say that. It's probably the case. But there are people who make arguments for other people. I'll give you a few examples. The Hindus. Let's talk about the Hindus. The Hindus are actually a blend of 2 people. There were the Aryan people who were coming down from the north, and there were the Dravidians who were coming up from the south. They meet in the Indian subcontinent, and over a course of hundreds of years sort of blend their cultures. However, that culture has been around for many thousands of years. So let's give the Hindus. Let's say the Hindus. Okay. Anybody else? Who? The Buddhists now. Buddhists just much more recent.
Chinese?
The Chinese. Okay, let's talk about the Chinese. Chinese is a big question mark. Here's the problem. When we talk about the Chinese, are we speaking about a country, or are we talking about a people? Chinese are not the Chinese are a country, right? It's people who live in China, right? What ethnic group are we referring to exactly? So what most would say, if you want to say they've been around forever, is the Han Chinese, okay? Starting from the Han Dynasty, many thousands of years ago. Now, the challenge is, if you know Chinese history, is that twice in the last millennium, China was overrun by invaders from the north. Remember they kept building that wall? Didn't work, right? Short story. By the way, lesson for Trump. Walls don't work. No, I'm kidding.
I like that.
Yeah, and especially, they don't, yeah, so anyway. So the Chinese spent, actually, the amount of time they spent building the Great Wall of China is a fascinating study in its own parts. I don't know if you know this, but we don't even know how long the Great Wall of China is because there's so many branches. It's not like just one straight wall.
Right.
It's got many tributaries, and there are parts that have fallen into disrepair. We discover every once in a while an extra 82 miles of the Great Wall. It's a fascinating thing. It's fascinating, the Great Wall. I wrote a Shabbos email about it. If you'd like, I can try to find it and dredge it up and send it to you. It's amazing. Now, they built the Great Wall of China because they knew there were some formidable enemies to the north. The first people to overtake them was the Manchus. Manchus or Mongols? I'm not sure which one was first. I think the Manchu. Okay, one or the other. There we go. There we go. All right. Either the Manchus or the Mongols. One came over the first time and took over the country and ruled for hundreds of years, and then the other one came over and took over the country and ruled for hundreds of years. While they ruled for hundreds of years, of course, they instituted their own policies. They instituted their own. So the question really is how pure, so to speak, is the Han Chinese culture that people describe today, right? But okay, let's give the Han Chinese. Fine. Who else? The Romans? No. There are people living in Rome today. Nothing to do with ancient Roman civilization. Egyptians? No. The Egyptians, the Christians, by the way, are only 2,000 years.
Right.
Right? And the Christians, by the way, they're constantly morphing, right? Even Christians today, there's not a set group of Christians, meaning the people within, you have different groups. There's the Coptic Christians, and there's many different, the Greek Orthodox Christians, and there are Christianity areas that come and go, right? So there are Christians in the world since basically 2,000 years ago, but it's a very much of a moving target.
Catholic religion?
The Catholic religion didn't start until much later than that, right? So it started like around 400 years after AD, so that started later. Definitely not 3,000 years. The reality is that if you think of all the great people, I mean, you go to the museums, right, and you look at all the artifacts from all the great people of the past, they're all gone. They really are. They're all gone. And we're talking about the greatest. Now there are hundreds of much more minor civilizations that just got subsumed, right? You know, you look at continents where constantly there was just fighting, and one tribe would take over another tribe and basically dissolve that tribe, and then another tribe would come, and there was just constant shifting of humanity. That is the history of the world. That is the history of the world. People take over people. I mean, even the English. Where did the English come from? It's a combination. The Anglos and the Saxons and the Vikings. I mean, there's a whole. There's no real set in stone peoplehood there until maybe 1,000 years ago. Now, my wife and I did one time go. Wait, was that the Grand Canyon? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. My wife. Thank God I have my wife here in the audience. Let's give her a round of applause. She's in charge of keeping my memory, in place. I say to people always, like, I'm like a computer that has a large hard drive, no RAM. So like, I've got a lot of information stored in here. I can't make sense of it and order it into the right places. So thank God when my wife is around. Okay. So one time my wife and I went to the Grand Canyon. Okay, and there's actually there's a few different parts of the Grand Canyon that you could visit. There's one part that's a very famous national park. Entrance is basically free. You pay a park entrance to the national park, but then once you get in there, it's all free basically. And then there's another part that's on an Indian reservation. Okay, and in this part of the park, this part of the Grand Canyon, you basically you have to pay through the nose. Now, by the way, I'll tell you, I'm impressed with the Native Americans who live on that tribal land. Because we did horrible things to the Native Americans. We displaced them, we kicked them out of their own countries, we Trail of Tears, all that. But that one nation, who's got their reservation right on the tip of the Grand Canyon, they are making their money back slowly. Slowly, one tourist at a time. To get in, you got to pay $35.
Wow. A car or a person?
$35 per car. Then to park your car is $35. Yeah. Then you have to take a bus. True story. You have to take a bus from the parking lot to the viewing area, which, by the way, is a 7-minute walk. Okay. You have to take a bus. How much does the bus cost? $35 per person. Okay. And then, this is the greatest scam. So let me save you the money. If you ever end up going out to the Grand Canyon, do not, whatever you do not pay to go out on the glass deck there's an area where they have an observation deck where it's a U-shaped observation deck where it's made out of glass, the floor, and they tell you it's 6,000 feet above the canyon floor. By the way, admission to the glass rainbow arch, how much? $35. Okay. Now here's what happens. Let me explain to you. This is a canyon, right? This is a canyon, the Grand Canyon, right? Very beautiful, amazing. Thank God I've had the honor to be there many times. Really quite a wondrous sight. Again, so it's like starts off over here. It's miles wide at certain places, right? And then it sort of cuts in. And sometimes it cuts steeply. Sometimes it cuts sharply and slowly. It's an amazing thing to see. And then it makes it all the way down. Now, the observation deck is over here. There is, by the way, 6,000 feet from where the observation deck is until the bottom of the canyon floor. But from where the rainbow arch is, remember, it goes like this. So from where the rainbow arch is, which is right over here, there's maybe 700 feet below the rainbow arch, maybe 1,000 feet. It's a lie. You don't get to look down 6,000 feet. You don't. It's not true, right? You literally maybe get to look down 700, maybe 1,000 feet. Because the canyon's going in like this. They don't put you out on a walkway all the way to the middle where it's 6,000 feet deep. It's a scam. Do save yourselves the money, by the way. And if you go in the near future and you remember and you save yourself the money, come back, donate the money to Partners Detroit. Get eternal reward instead of supreme disappointment. Okay. Now, when we were in the parking lot was patrolled by natives, from the Native American tribe.
You had to pay for them to watch your car?
No, that was I think that's included in the $35 parking fee. So, I asked one of the natives there, and I came over to I asked very respectfully, I said, how you doing? Whatever, my name's Leiby, Burnham. I'm curious, I said, how long have your people been here at the Grand Canyon? Your peoples, like your tribe. And he looks at me and says, 35,000 years. Wow.
Only number.
Oh, right, that's crazy. I didn't even realize that. He said 35,000. Everything is 35, right? It's like, there are certain tribes that don't have, like, we have a very extensive numbering system. Believe it or not, there are tribes out there that count like 1, 2, 3, many. No jokes. There are tribes that they don't have any numbers past 3. So it's like, how many children do you have? I have 1. I have 3. I have many. How many is many? Many. It's a fascinating thing. They just don't have the words. So I wonder if maybe there's like a 35 thing. Really, 35 just means a lot. How much money does it cost to park? A lot. How many years have you been here? A lot of thousands, right? Anyway, so I said to him, I said, is there any kind of proof? Like, do you guys have sort of archaeological evidence of this? Is there any kind of proof that your nation has been here for 35,000 years? He said, nope. Okay, great. I said, great. Thank you. And I walked my merry way. But the bottom line is, okay, so maybe his people have been here for 35,000 years, so then we'd give him also credit as a nation that's been around for a very, 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 very long time. So we can count basically, there's about 5. You want to count the Han Chinese, we'll give it to you. You want to count the Hindus, we'll give it to you, right? Maybe you can count some Native African American tribes. In Africa, for sure, is very, very low likelihood there's actually a singular tribe in a singular place, because again, if you read the history of these places, incredible amounts of war, tribes constantly subsuming and taking over other tribes, creating multiple tribes and splintering off, fighting, cutting off. It's a constant shift of demographics. But let's say there's 5 nations in the history of the world that have been around forever. Now, how many peoples have there been in the world? Again, when I said micro-ethnic groups, there's been thousands. It's 5,000. There's been roughly 5,000 major cultures since the beginning of the time, right, that we have recorded history. Historians give us a number roughly around there. 5,000 major cultures. So, 5,000 major cultures, 5 who have been around for 3,000, 5,000 years. What percentage of nations make it for the long run? No. 0.1. It's very simple, right? 0.1, right? 1% of 5,000 would be 50, right? 10% would be 500, 1% would be 50. 0.1%. 1/10 of 1% of people have been around for thousands of years. So, that means that 99.9% of people have not been around for thousands of years. So, let's take a little thought game over here. Imagine we're a bunch of angry people writing a book with all kinds of wrathful vengeance and yada, yada, yada. Right? Okay. And we want this book to be a bestseller for all of history. So first of all, the smartest thing we would do is just don't make any predictions about what's going to happen in history. Because when you make predictions and they don't come true, you know what happens to your book? It ends up in the wastebasket of history. Right? If you say this will happen, and this doesn't happen, we throw your book out. So if we want our book to be a bestseller for as long as possible, we would best off not make predictions about any group of people that will be around forever. Because peoples don't last forever. History is fluid. Peoples come and go. 99.9% of peoples did not last thousands of years. So why would I ever make a prediction, that a specific group of people is going to last for thousands of years? The answer is I wouldn't. But yet our Torah, and we're going to see now the sources, incredibly explicitly clear, again and again and again, tells us that we the Jewish people are going to be around forever. People ask me, are you worried about an Iran, a nuclear holocaust? And of course I'm worried.
Sure.
But I always say to them, I'll tell you what I'm not worried about. I literally am never, ever, ever worried that the Jewish people will be wiped out. Because God promised us. And we've seen it happen throughout all of history already. Therefore, I'm not worried. I'm worried about a sizable chunk of the Jewish people being wiped out. If, God forbid, Iran got a hold of a nuclear weapon and they used it on Israel, it could wipe out millions of people. That I am worried about. And we'll do everything I can, with my limited capabilities, unfortunately, to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear missile. However, that being said, I'm never, ever, ever worried that the Jewish people will be wiped out. Let's see what God says inside. Source number 3. Bereshis, Yud Zayin Zayin, Genesis 17:7. V'hakimosi, God says to Avram, Hakimosi is brisi beini u'beincha, and I will make my covenant between me and your children, u'bein zaracha acharecha l'dorosam, and for all of your offspring, for l'dorosam, for all of their generations, libris olam, an eternal covenant. Lios l'cha l'elokim v'l'zaracha acharecha. I will be your children's God forever. Again, not saying there will be a religion called Judaism forever, but saying your children will be the Jews forever. Your children will be my people forever. Again, many religions, the original people who originated the religion are not around anymore. There's different ethnic groups that have taken up that religion. Right? I'll give you a simple example. What's the largest Muslim population in the world?
Dearborn?
Dearborn? No. Ah, very good. Indonesia. The largest Muslim country in the world, with the largest Muslim population in the world, is Indonesia. It's not Saudi Arabia, and it's not Iran, Iraq, it's not Lebanon or Syria. It's none of the Middle Eastern countries, which is where Muhammad actually sort of started his whole deal. It's Indonesia. So the religion is still the religion, but the people are not the same people. And there are still, obviously, Muslims in the Middle East, where Muhammad did his thing, right? There's no question about it. There's still Muslims there. But the point is that not necessarily does a religion always stick with the people. God says here, very specifically, says to Abraham, I will be your God and the God of your children forever and ever, which means they will be here and I will be their God. And guess what? We're here and he's still our God. We're still calling on Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, in millions of locations all over the world. Next, Leviticus 26, 44, and 45. Vayikra Chafvav Memdalad and Memhei. Says Hashem, Va'af gam zos biyosam be'eretz ovehem. Even when they will be in their enemy's land. Lo ma'astim v'lo galtim l'chalosam l'fer brisi. Tell them I will not reject or spurn them. Because if I did that, then I would nullify my own bris. I would nullify my covenant that I made with Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Ki ani Hashem Elokechem, for I am Hashem your God. V'zacharti lem bris rishonim, I will remember the covenant that I made with the early forefathers. Asher otzeisios ameretz Mitzrayim le'enei hagoyim, that I took them out of the land of Egypt in the eyes of the rest of the world. Lios lehem Elohim ani Hashem, to be their God, I am Hashem. I can't, even when they're in Golos, even when they're in exile. Now remember, by the way, when peoples go into exile, we're going to talk about that in a moment also. They get lost. God says, even when they're in exile, I will not lose them because I made a commitment to their forefathers. Next, Malachi, one of the prophets. Malachi says in Parak Gimel Pasuk Vav, Malachi 3:6, Ki ani Hashem lo shanisi, I am God, I don't change. Ve'atem b'nei Yaakov lo kilisem, and you, the children of Jacob, will never cease to be. Very clear, very unequivocally clear. And our last one, and this one actually has an extra knach, an extra point. This comes from Yeshaya, Parak Nun Tes Pasuk Chaf Aleph, Isaiah 59:21. Va'ani zos brisio samamar Hashem. As for me, this is my covenant with them, says Hashem. Ruchi asher alecha, my spirit, which is rests upon you, udvarei asher samti b'ficha, the words that I put in your mouth. Lo yamushu mipicha, mipizaracha, mipizarazaracha, amar Hashem atov olam, shall not depart from your mouth, nor from the mouths of your children's, nor from the mouths of your children's children, from now unto all of eternity. So here, not only is God saying that we're going to be here for all of eternity, but God says, not only do I promise you, you will be here forever, but I promise you that you will be speaking these exact words forever. Which, by the way, this is what we're doing right now. Everybody here in this room is right now fulfilling this prophecy. God said that forever and ever there will be Jews, and forever and ever they will be learning the words that I put in your mouth. Is that amazing? It's not just saying that there will be a Jewish people, which is an amazing thing in its own right, but that they will always be studying my Torah. They will always be speaking the words that I put into your mouth. What an incredible prediction. If you are a human being, again, if you're a betting man, and you're writing a book that you want to be a bestseller throughout all of history, which the Bible is, are you going to write a prediction that is not something that is at all likely? As a matter of fact, is 99.9% unlikely to come true. No, you would not. By the way, that's why all the other nations don't have these kind of things written into their books. That's why all the other nations talk about what's going to happen in Kingdom Come. I don't want to make predictions that I can't fulfill. But God is very comfortable making predictions, bold predictions, predictions that only happen to 0.1% of the population, because He can ensure that it happens. That is the first wonder of Jewish history. Now, we're going to do one more wonder today. Exile. How many exiles can you mention in history?
Many. Many.
Go ahead, many? Go ahead.
The Hutus and the Tutsis.
The Hutus and the Tutsis was not an exile. They were fighting over land and slaughtering each other. It's not an exile. Remember, an exile is when you come into a land, take the indigenous people, and kick them out.
If we listen to the news,
Okay, the Palestinians, no, they're not. That was definitely not an exile. Yeah, okay, fine. I don't know what you're reading. You're reading the wrong. You're getting your news from the wrong source, right? First of all, there's plenty of Palestinians living in Israel today. Hundreds of thousands of them. They're on the Supreme Court in Israel. They get to vote. They've got 20 seats in the Knesset. Right? Don't worry that there are plenty. We did not exile all the Palestinians. As a matter of fact, there were people who wanted to exile all the Arabs out of Israel and say, we can't live with them in peace, and they're not willing to coexist with us, so let's get them out of our country. Most famously was Rabbi Cook, and unfortunately he was murdered. But the point is, like, that we definitely did not exile because they're still there. Name me exiles. There are a few. Say that again. Okay, and Babylonians exiled who? The Jews. No, not Jews. Not Jews. I mean, other non-Jewish exiles. So America, by the way. America. Oh, good. The Armenians. Good. Here we go. Now we're working it. Number one, America. Right? We actually wanted the Indians' land, the Native Americans' land. So we kicked them out. Right? We took them and threw them out. Cherokee Trail of Tears, we threw them out of their land, said go to the reservations, and we took the land. That's one very good example. Another good example is the Armenians. There was a genocide and an exile. They took everybody out of the land. What else? In the Philippines, what happened? The Japanese took control of the peninsula, but they didn't kick all the Filipinos out. They just took control. There's all of history is filled with people taking control of another country. But I'm talking about where the conqueror takes all the people and throws them out. I'll explain to you why it's incredible. I'll explain to you, by the way, why it's incredibly rare in history.
The French in Canada, except for Louisiana.
The French in Canada.
Yes, when the British took over.
Okay, so again, the British won a war, right? But they didn't empty out the land. They won a war. They left. There were some French that fled. Let me explain to you what an exile means, and I'll explain to you why it's incredibly rare in history. It's actually, it's not, they didn't exile every French person, say every French person needs to leave, and every Indian needs to leave, and empty out the whole land.
Inquisition?
The Inquisition was not an exile at all. It was persecution of specific people. And again, wars happen all the time. Exiles don't. When I take over another country, and I just empty it out, what good does it do for me? Throughout history, what happens is, I take over a country, I leave the people there, and I subjugate them. And I force them to pay me tribute, and taxes, and wood, and gold, and slaves, and so on. History is filled with conquest. Very rarely in history do you have exile, because if I take all the indigenous people and empty them out, What am I going to do with the land? It just sits there, lying fallow and not benefiting me at all.
Did Alexander the Great do that when he moved?
No. Alexander the Great had
from one place to another.
Alexander the Great had his soldiers come in and marry all the local people so they could be sort of like in with the population and be able to rule more effectively. So Alexander the Great had a very smart policy, which was make your officers marry the local nobility. This way they're entrenched in the land and you can control the population better. But he did not exile. Okay, so, yeah. Right. So Sancheiriv, by the way, that's a good example. That's part of our Jewish Bible. But what Sancheiriv would do was switch people's locations, not leaving a place empty, but just switch locations so that people should not feel like this is our land and then be less likely to give the tribute. But taking a country that's a productive country and just emptying it out and leaving it empty almost never happens. It happened, I'll tell you another example, in the Punic Wars. Right? So the Punic Wars were between Carthage and Rome, constantly fighting each other. And at one point, the Carthaginians came in and sacked Rome and burned Rome. And when the Romans came back and took over Carthage, they literally just exiled everybody out. They kicked everybody out and left the place desolate. But it was an act of sheer anger and revenge. It's incredibly rare in history to see exiles. Again, the few exceptions are where there are people who need the land, right? Like all of colonial Africa, for example. They didn't exile anybody, they just came in and controlled it. Colonial India, right? Meaning, you think of all the colonies and all the conquests, the idea is take over Alexander the Great. Think of all Attila the Hun, right? Meaning Genghis Khan. They all took over massive tracts of land, but always kept the people there and forced them to show loyalty. Exiles almost never happen. We can maybe name 5 exiles. The crazy thing is that the Torah tells the Jews that we're going to have 2 exiles. As we did. We were exiled by the Babylonians, and then 470 years later, we were exiled by the Romans. Okay? This is an insane thing that never happened to any people in all of history. In all of history. The Torah gives 2 very specific descriptions of horrible things happening to the Jewish people. One is in the book of Leviticus, at the end of Leviticus, and one is in the book of Deuteronomy. And in each one of those, one's describing the first exile, one's describing the second exile. God tells us that He's going to kick us out of our land and leave it. Which is an incredibly strange thing in history. This doesn't happen to people. And by the way, guess what? What did God say in the first one? That we're going to be around forever. If you want a people to be around forever, the best bet is leave them on their land in peace and security. Like, by the way, the Han Chinese and the Hindus. Right? Meaning, for the few nations that we see that might have had continuity for thousands of years, it's because they were secure, they were on one land, whether or not they got conquered by other people or not, but they were sitting in one place, they stuck in one place, they held their ground, they held their traditions. But God says that we're going to be an eternal nation, but yet He also says you're going to be thrown out of your lands. And not only that, when you get thrown out, you're not going to be together in one big clump. It won't be like we're going to take the body of Israel and move it to France. It's like we're going to take the body of Israel and scatter it all over the world. We're going to be incredibly spread out, and yet we're going to hold on to our religion and still have and our Judaism and still be a people? That's impossible. That's impossible. But that's what it says. Let's see it inside, and then we're going to call it a day. Source number 4. Vayikra, Chaf Vav, Lamed Gimel, Leviticus 26:33. Ve'eschem ezre bagoyim. God says, I will scatter you. I will sow you amongst the nations. Varikosi acharechem charav, and I will unsheathe the sword after you. V'hoisa artzachem shemama varechem yiyu charva. And your land will be desolate, and your cities will be a ruin. Again, no one in history leaves incredible land just sitting, laying fallow. It's not smart. It doesn't work. But God here in Leviticus tells us that the Babylonians will come. They will absolutely come with a sword after you, scatter you out amongst the world, and leave your place empty. Next, Deuteronomy 28:63 and 64. Devarim, Chaf Ches, Samach Gimel and Samach Dalet. V'nisachtem me'al ha'adama asher tabah sham l'rishta. God says, you will be torn from the land which you are about to occupy. V'hefitzcha Hashem b'chol ha'amim miktzei ha'aretz v'ad k'tzei ha'aretz. And God will scatter you all over the world, from one end of the world to the other. Again, it's so bold to make a prediction that any group is going to be around forever. But to say that they're going to be around forever, which happens to maybe 0.1% of peoples, and then say that they're going to be exiled not once, but twice, which happens to no peoples in the history of mankind have been exiled twice, and yet scattered across the world and still be able to maintain who they are and still be an eternal nation, that seems like impossible to me. But it's in the book, and we're here. So it did happen. We'll cover more about just how far we've been dispersed next week. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful week.